Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. Today, I want to talk about a couple things that I think we can learn from our kids. See, children are born into this world with two truly remarkable characteristics. The first is that they're totally unafraid. They think in terms of I can, not I can't, but they think in terms of I can. They feel they can do anything they want. They really only have a couple fears when infants. It's usually the fear of falling. They have that fear of falling, and they have a fear of noise, of loud noises. Other than that, kids are pretty much completely fearless. Babies are not born with specific fears outside of what I just mentioned. But as they grow and as they develop, they may begin to exhibit fears related to certain situations or objects. Now, how does this happen? This process occurs through learning, through environmental influences. Here's how it typically happens, right? They learn through experience. They're conditioned. One of the most common ways kids develop fears is through conditioning. So if the kid has a negative or frightening experience with something like falling into water, let's say, they may develop a fear of water. This is a learned association between the event and the fear, and that could even lead to some sort of lasting phobia. In addition to this conditioning of learning through experience, they also learn through observation. Children learn by observing others. If they see a parent, for example, or a peer reacting fearfully to something, they might mimic that reaction and they develop a similar fear. So, for example, if a parent is afraid of insects, the child might adopt that fear. Kids are not born with these fears. It is a combination of learning and environmental influences. Learning through experience, through conditioning, or even observational learning are keys in developing these fears. You also have social and cultural influences. The environment in which a kid is raised can also play a significant role in the development of fears, in that cultural norms, societal values, even media can influence what kids perceive as threatening. For example, if a kid constantly is exposed to stories about dangerous animals or stories of accidents, that might lead a child to fear those things. See, society and culture influence the development of these fears. What I want to lean into, though, is parental influence. Parents' reactions, behaviors, they significantly impact a kid's perception of the world. So an overprotective or an overanxious parent may unintentionally pass on their fears to their children by constantly warning about potential dangers or restricting activities in a way in a way to protect from the risk, right? So this past weekend, for example, I observed, my family and I were up at this outdoor activity up at the ski hill where they run like these summer activities. And there's this big, air sort of mattress sort of thing that you jump off, a ledge that's a story or 2 stories high, and you land into this big, air. I don't even know what the heck you would call this thing, but it was just full of air. You couldn't get hurt, but it was a little scary. And my wife and I both jumped, and our kids are risk takers in that sense, and they both jumped, and no one really thought anything of it. But then I observed, and I'm not trying to sound judgmental, it's just an interesting observation. I observed a number of kids that were pretty scared to take this leap, even from the lowest level where you weren't really falling all that far. And I couldn't help, I'm saying I'm not being judgmental. I guess I was. I couldn't help but look around and find that kid's parent or parents and see what was their behavior like. And sure enough, I get to talking to a mom. She's like, "Oh, I would never do that. That's too scary." And then I see her son unwilling to take that jump. Now, again, I may be making some sort of false correlation here, But is it possible that that parent who's afraid of heights taught that child unintentionally to be fearful of heights as well? And where else might that also be showing up? Again, kids are not born with this fear. It's developed through experience, through social and cultural influences, through parental influence, and of course, just other things like traumatic event and biological predisposition and generalization of fears. Children might also generalize their fears from one object or situation to another. There's lots of things, right? Like, for example, a kid who gets bitten by a dog may develop a fear of all dogs, not just the one that bit them. That'd be a generalization. There's lots of ways we can develop fear. But here's where I'm going with this. This is what I wanted to talk about. Because I think that if you can learn to be fearful, if you can learn fear, then you can also unlearn fear. Children and adults can unlearn fears through lots of different techniques. Number one, you may have heard of exposure therapy. This is just gradual exposure. One of the most effective methods for unlearning fear is gradual exposure. So it's just like it sounds, slowly and systematically exposing the kid or the adult to the feared object or situation in a controlled and safe environment may decrease the amount of fear that they once experienced. So, for example, I was just reading about a child who was fearful of dogs. But then that child was exposed to other kids playing with dogs. You know, not just one kid or two kids, but groups of kids playing with dogs. And this kid's kind of on the outside observing these other kids. And in observing all of these other kids, right, and seeing what is the norm and seeing what his peers were doing, his comfort level increased such that he then slowly started playing with the dogs as well. And over the course of time, that fear of dogs went away, right? So let's say a kid's afraid of dogs. Maybe they look at pictures of dogs first. They observe other kids playing with dogs. Then maybe they watch from a distance, and eventually they interact with the dog, with a calm, friendly dog, right? So this exposure therapy, this gradual exposure, creates some sort of desensitization, right? In addition, in order to unlearn a fear, modeling works. Observational learning for children and adults can help people, kids, adults, unlearn fears. Just observing others who do not share that same fear and who react calmly to that feared situation, especially if it's someone you trust or you love. Maybe it's family, maybe it's a close friend, right? So, for instance, if a kid's afraid of swimming, watching another kid or adult enjoy swimming without fear can help them reframe their perceptions. If a parent or a peer is modeling this calm, confident behavior when encountering that feared object or that feared situation, this can help the child learn that there's no real danger. Now, in this feedback loop, we need reinforcement as well. So positive reinforcement. So reward the kid for facing their fear, even if it's just a small step. In doing that, you can encourage them to continue confronting the fear. So if I would go back to that example I was giving around leaping off that ledge into the big air track, maybe the kid that's fearful wasn't going to run and just jump. But maybe a first step would be at least walking to the edge. And then I reinforce positively that behavior. Praise, a treat, extra playtime, whatever it may be, because the kid engaged with their feared situation. And this will build confidence. And by reinforcing the kid's bravery and reinforcing the kid's resilience, you help them build confidence and their ability to cope with this fear. By the way, this does work for adults as well. It sounds childish in the manner I just described it, but it's not. In sales, for example, maybe there's fear of getting on the phone, fear of calling a stranger. I think we've all experienced some degree of this if we're in sales. You don't have to just pick up the phone and knock it out of the park, but just make an a call or 2 calls or 3 calls and build that momentum, build that muscle, and then have positive reinforcement around it. It can reshape that fear. There's lots of other ways to unlearn fears. But the point today, and what I'm really trying to emphasize, is that fear is a learned behavior for the most part. There's a couple fears when you're a baby, maybe fear of falling, fear of loud noises, but outside of that, it's learned, which most importantly, for sake of today's conversation, it can be unlearned. It can be unlearned. Now, I mentioned there's two really remarkable characteristics of kids. The first is that they're totally unafraid. The other is that they're completely uninhibited. We'll save the uninhibited conversation for another day. But the focusing question for you today, where are you experiencing some degree of fear? And you know you got to do something about it. What steps can you take? Maybe some of the things I described today or things we didn't discuss today, but you know could work to unlearn that fear. I also want you to recognize that as the adult listening to this podcast, your fears may be unintentionally influencing others, specifically those kids that you're leading, and creating fear for them. Even though you don't intend to do it, they're observing you. You're modeling it. So what steps can you take today to change that approach, unlearn that fear, conquer whatever that is in front of you, and live a more extraordinary life? That's all I have for you today. The No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.